Hello and welcome back to a new unit in Virginia Studies. In this unit, we will begin talking about the people of America. Now that we've gotten the basic geography out of the way, this is where the story part of history comes in. But the story doesn't begin where some would have you think it does. North America didn't get its start at Jamestown. Neither was it discovered when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. This continent's history doesn't even begin with Leif Erikson being the first European to step foot on the continent with his fellow Vikings around the year 1000. Sure, these people discovered the continent for their respective countries, but there were millions of people thriving all over the continent of North America for tens of thousands of years before the first Europeans ever showed up. To put that into perspective, Native Americans lived in North America alone more than 10,000 years longer than it's been since Jamestown was founded. That is where our story begins. Throughout this unit, we will dive into who the first North Americans were and what their daily lives were like. But in this particular video, we are going to answer the question, how do we know about the lives of the Native Americans from hundreds of years ago? By the end of this video, you should be able to describe new evidence found at Werowocomoco by archaeologists. So what do you already know about Virginia's first inhabitants? What you know probably has something to do with Disney's Pocahontas, right? Well, even though Disney got some things right, they got a lot wrong. First, Jamestown and Werowocomoco are both in the Tidewater region, not too far from us. Have you ever seen mountains or waterfalls nearby? No? That's because the land is flat where we are. Pocahontas married John Rolfe, not John Smith, and most importantly, she did not save the relationship between the English and the Powhatan, but we'll dive into that relationship later on. But how do we know things like this? After all, these people lived in a time hundreds of years before television, and they did not record their history in books or newspapers. Well, we have learned from a variety of sources. Some of what we know comes from the first-hand accounts of early European explorers like Christopher Columbus and the settlers at Jamestown. Unlike the Native Americans, Europeans recorded their history in books that we still have access to today. We call these first-hand accounts primary sources. Other sources, like textbooks, are considered secondary sources. These were written for the purpose of teaching us about Native Americans, and the authors of the textbooks used primary sources to write those textbooks. Lastly, over the years, people have unearthed many items and tools that were used by the Native Americans. These are called artifacts, and they also help us to understand what life was like for Native Americans. Have you ever wondered why Native Americans are sometimes called Indians, even though they are not from India? Well, that's all because of Christopher Columbus. He and his crew were some of the first outsiders to see and describe the lives of North America's native people, and he recorded it all in his journal. When he first landed in North America, though, he didn't know it existed because it wasn't on any maps. So he thought he'd arrived at his destination, the Indies, near India. As a result, he called the people he discovered there Indians, and the name stuck, even after they realized they were not in the Indies. As I shared earlier, in addition to the recorded accounts of Europeans that came to North America, we also rely heavily on artifacts that have been found over the years to help us create a picture of what life was like for Native Americans. In the images above, you can see an arrowhead as well as shells that have been smoothed and shaped to help perform tasks. The last image is of a dig site where Werowocomoco used to be. People called archaeologists carefully dig down through several layers of dirt to find artifacts that have been buried over time. With these artifacts, we can make inferences about the lives of the people who used them. All right, it's time for a check-in. What are 2 ways we can understand what life was like for Native Americans? If you can answer this question, you are ready to move on.